The late 1980s was the greatest time in hip-hop history. Period. Full stop. Amen. Please be seated. Allow me to make my case. From the moment Jeff and I stepped on that tour bus in late 1986 through summer 1988, we performed nearly 200 shows. And I would like to list just a few of the hip-hop icons with whom I shared a stage. Imagine this in my trying not to be an asshole voice. Run DMC, LL Cool J, Houdini, Public Enemy, 2 Live Crew, Salt and Pepper, Eric B. and Rakim, NWA, EPMD, UTFO, JJ Fad, Beastie Boys, The Ghetto Boys, Heavy D and the Boys, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Kid and Play, MC Lyte, Queen Latifah, Grandmaster Flash, Ice-T, Mantronix and Just Ice, Eazy-E, Too Short, MC Hammer, Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick, Big Daddy Kane, Biz Markie, Roxanne Shante, MC Shan and the whole Juice Crew, A Tribe Called Quest, Leaders of the New School, Naughty by Nature. Shall I continue? Are we good? This was one of the greatest periods of my life. This is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Will, by Will Smith and Mark Manson.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Duncan Simpson, and you've just heard from Dr. Greg Young. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propel the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights, representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. Listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in the field. Now, Greg, I am sure every one of our listeners will have heard of Will Smith, but why don't you give us a little bit of background on his accomplishments?
Absolutely. He is certainly well known, and probably most well known for his stint in 1990 to 1996 on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, obviously where he played the star. That was the thing that launched his career and became an iconic cultural phenomenon literally all around the world. In terms of movies, he's an Academy Award winner or an Oscar winner. In 2022, he won the Best Actor for his portrayal of Richard Williams in King Richard. He's a 2-time Academy Award nominee, nominated for Ali in 2001 and The Pursuit of Happiness in 2006, a Golden Globe winner in 2022, where he won Best Actor for King Richard as well. Blockbuster icon, obviously starred in multiple films grossing over $9 billion worldwide. Some of the hits, obviously, Men in Black, Independence Day, I Am Legend, Bad Boys in the Bad Boys series, The Pursuit of Happiness. He has crushed it at the box office, to be perfectly frank. Obviously a very diverse range of acting ability as well. He's excelled in comedy, action, drama, sci-fi. He certainly has an elite adaptability as an actor. And he was known for his box office streak. In the early 2000s, he was one of the few actors with 8 consecutive films, get this, Duncan, grossing over $100 million domestically.
That is a lot of money.
That is a lot of money. In terms of obviously music and his rap career, he was a Grammy Award winner 4 times, including the first ever Grammy for rap performance, for Parents Just Don't Understand, all the way back in 1988. He's obviously a platinum-selling artist, and his albums include Big Willie Style, released in 1997, 10 million copies of that sold. We've got Getting Jiggy With It in Miami, or global hits from that album, and Millennium in 1999 featured the hit single Wild Wild West, which was partnered obviously with the film Wild Wild West. In terms of his business and philanthropy, this might be the part of him that most people are less aware of. Westbrook Media, he co-founded a production company that's developed innovative content across digital and traditional platforms. He has environmental and philanthropic work, co-founded Just Water, which is an eco-conscious bottled water company. And he also has other numerous global humanitarian efforts around education, youth programs, and disaster relief.
He has had quite a career, busy man.
Busy man, but definitely a renaissance man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book today?
Yeah, to be honest, it was an excellent read. I'll be very candid. It's a monster. It's a huge, huge book. And when I said I was going to read this one, Duncan, I didn't know that going in. But with that being said, it was super, super enjoyable. I really did enjoy reading about his life, certainly learning about his early life. And the book focuses a lot on relationships and really important people within his life, romantic relationships, personal relationships, relationships with his family members. And there's so much that we're actually not going to get to today. We've had to be really selective perspective for our needs here on Performers. I would really, really encourage anyone to pick up this book. It's an easy read in terms of its accessibility. It is a long one, but if you've maybe got a 2-week holiday coming up somewhere, it might be a good one to read by the pool.
Yep, so let's jump in, Greg.
Let's do it. My father was my hero. His name was Willard Carroll Smith, but we called him Daddy-O. Daddy-O was born and raised in the rough and rugged streets of North Philadelphia in the 1940s. Daddy-O's father, my grandfather, owned a small fish market. He had to work from 4 a.m. until late every night. My grandmother was a nurse and often worked the night shift at the hospital. As a result, Daddy-O spent much of his childhood alone and unsupervised. The North Philly streets had a way of hardening you. You either crystallized into a mean motherfucker or the hood broke you. Daddy-O was smoking cigarettes by 11 and drinking by the age of 14. My father developed a defiant and aggressive attitude that would continue all of his life. So as a result of this, Duncan, might be unsurprising to hear, Daddy-O ends up getting shipped away to the military as he was certainly going off the rails. And Will says, it was in the military that he discovered the transformative power of order and discipline, two values that he came to worship as the guardrails protecting him from the worst parts of himself. Wake up at 4 a.m., train all morning, work all day, study all night. He found his lane. He discovered that he could outlast anybody, and he began to take pride in that. It was another aspect of his defiant attitude. Nobody could force him to wake up with a bugle horn because he was already up. Now, didn't go great for him in the army, so obviously the structure was very, very good, but he did get into a little bit of trouble. He won a lot of money, about $1,000 in a dice game. Will said he had a really, really hot hand when it came to the dice, but he ended up getting that money stolen from the people that he won it from, and he went, I think berserk is probably the right word, in the barracks with a pistol, and they decided to discharge him from the army as a result of that. On the other side of things, his mother was very, very different. She'd been a standout student at Westinghouse High School and was one of the first black women to ever study at Carnegie Mellon University. Mom would often say that knowledge was the only thing the world couldn't take away from you, and she only cared about 3 things: education, education, and education. In many ways, Mom is the total opposite of my father. Whereas Daddy-O was the boisterous, charismatic centre of attention, Mom is quiet and reserved. Not because she's shy or intimidated, but because she only speaks when it improves on silence. She loves words and always chooses them carefully. She speaks with an academic sophistication. Daddy-O, on the other hand, was loud, spewing the lingo of 1950s North Philly hood rat. He loved the poetry of his profanity. I once heard him call a man a dirty rat, cocksucking, low-down, mangy pig fucker. Quite the sentence. Mom doesn't use profanity. Thank God for that. It's important to note here that back in the day, Daddy-O was the man. 6'2", smart, good-looking, the proud owner of a fire engine red convertible Pontiac. He was funny. He could sing. He could play the guitar. He could lock people into him. He was always the dude standing in the middle of a party with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other, a master storyteller who could keep a room buzzing. So, Duncan, we've got 2 contrasting personalities in his parents here, but I think you can hear definite parts of Will Smith as we know him today.
Yes, it sounds like Will is a perfect fusion of his parents. From Daddy-O, it sounds like he inherited his charisma, his presence, and his ability to command attention, traits that made him a natural star in music, TV, and film. Like his father, he has a presence and can tell a story and is obviously talented. From Mom, he got his intelligence, his precision, it sounds like, and his ability to adapt. She taught him the power of words, and that's exactly what allowed him to navigate multiple industries so successfully. He took his dad's magnetism and his mum's intelligence and used them to really create an amazing career, Greg.
Absolutely. So we have Daddy-O, we have Mom, and now we have Gigi, who is Will's mother's mother, so his grandma. And when his parents got married, they moved into Gigi's house and ran a business from there. And Daddy-O and Mom made an absolutely formidable team. And Will says, my middle-class upbringing contributed to the constant criticism I took early in my rap career. I wasn't a gangster. I wasn't selling drugs. I grew up on a nice street in a 2-parent household. I went to a Catholic school with mostly white kids until I was 14. My mom was college educated. And for all his faults, my father always put food on the table and would die before he abandoned his kids. My story was very different from the ones being told by the young black men who were launching the global phenomenon that would later become hip-hop. In their minds, I was somehow an illegitimate artist. They would call me soft, whack, corny, a bubblegum rapper. Criticisms that violently infuriated me. Looking back, I realize I may have been projecting a little bit, but the reason I hated it so much is that they were unknowingly poking at the thing I hated most about myself. my sense that I was a coward. Duncan, this notion of him viewing himself as a coward is actually a pretty pervasive theme throughout the whole book and sort of is a little bit of a golden thread that runs through. And he says, I've always thought of myself as a coward. Most of my memories of my childhood involve me being afraid in some way. Afraid of other kids, afraid of being hurt or embarrassed, afraid of being seen as weak. But mostly, I was afraid of my father. When I was 9 years old, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of her head so hard that she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment in that bedroom, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am today. What you have to come to understand as Will Smith, the alien annihilating MC, the bigger-than-life movie star, it's largely a construction, a carefully crafted and honed character designed to protect myself, to hide myself from the world, to hide the coward.
Greg, let me jump in here. This is a fascinating contradiction. He's being brutally honest, and it's incredibly sad, especially the part about the domestic violence. Will Smith, the larger-than-life superstar, built his entire persona as a shield against this deep insecurity that he had. The world sees confidence, they see charisma and control, but I think beneath it all, there's a terrified little child. It seems like he didn't have a strong sense of identity and definitely felt like an outsider to the world of hip-hop, and the criticism really seemed to have impacted him. However, what is really powerful is how he's taken some of these insecurities and fears, Greg, and he's turned them into some relentless work ethic, an obsession with entertaining others, and ultimately a pursuit of superstardom, which I know that we'll get to. Will Smith isn't just a performer, but rather he's a carefully crafted character, and he's done this like any good actor. He's giving us a really rare peek and a vulnerable glimpse behind the mask. It's both inspiring, but also sad too.
Certainly a sad element to it. Now, growing up in that type of household is obviously going to have an impact on you. One of the things that it did is it instilled certain values and certainly ways of thinking, and that was predominantly dictated by his father. So there's a really fun, well, not fun, perhaps is the wrong word, but an enjoyable anecdote in the book about how he and his brothers helped his dad to lay bricks on a weekend, on holidays and vacations with no rest. Ultimately, Daddy-O had tasked them with building a massive wall. Daddy-O says, "Stop thinking about the damn wall," he said. "There's no wall, there's only bricks. Your job is to lay this brick perfectly, then move on to the next brick, then lay that brick perfectly, then the next one. Don't be worrying about no wall. Your only concern is one brick." The days dragged on, and as much as I hated to admit it, I started seeing what he was talking about. When I focused on the wall, the job felt impossible, never ending. But when I focused on one brick, everything got easy. I could lay one damn brick well. As the weeks passed and the bricks mounted, the hole just got a little bit smaller. I started to see that difference between a task that feels impossible and a task that feels doable as merely a matter of perspective. Are you paying attention to the wall, or are you paying attention to the brick? For my entire career, I've been absolutely relentless. I've been committed to a work ethic of uncompromising intensity, and the secret to my success is as boring as it is unsurprising. You show up, you lay another brick. Pissed off? Lay another brick. Bad opening weekend? Lay another brick. Album sales dropping? Get up and lay another brick. Marriage failing? Lay another brick. No matter what you're going through, there is always another brick sitting right there in front of you, waiting to be laid. The only question is, are you going to get up and lay it? The three of us surveyed our family's new wall. Daddy-O plucked his cigarette to the ground, twisting his boot to put it out, exhaled on the final drag of smoke, and never taking his eyes off the wall, he said, "Now don't you all ever tell me there's something you can't do." Then he walked into the shop and got back to work. Duncan, what life lessons can you pull out here?
I absolutely love it. It made me think of that question, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. It's simple, but this is a masterclass in mindset, breaking down something that seems absolutely overwhelming into the really manageable little bites. His father wasn't just teaching him how to build a wall. He's teaching him an approach to life, which Will carries forward, as he says. So I think big goals can feel paralyzing, but the key to achievement is focusing on that next step. Success isn't often about those grand actions, those big steps. It's about being consistent and disciplined in your effort. Lay the next brick. It's not glamorous, but it's the foundation of relentless success. Hard work works. Let me say that again. Hard work works.
I love that. And there's an interesting juxtaposition all the way through this book that There's times when I love Daddy-O and times when I absolutely hate him. Sometimes he's phenomenal and sometimes where he's an absolute abomination. It's a really strange sort of being pulled in both directions. And I think that's something that Will brings up in this next paragraph. My father tormented me, and he was also one of the greatest men I've ever known. My father was violent, but he was also at every game, play, and recital. He was an alcoholic, but he was sober at every premiere of one of my movies. He listened to every record, he visited every studio. The same intense perfectionism that terrorized his family put food on the table every night of my life. So many of my friends grew up either not knowing their fathers or not having their fathers around. But Daddy-O had my back and never abandoned his post, not even once. So one of the ways that Will managed to sort of navigate this tumultuous world, if that's even the right way to put this, was through humor and entertainment. Perhaps unsurprisingly, that's obviously what he's known for. And particularly focusing on his father. He says, as long as Daddy-O was laughing and smiling, I believed I would be safe. I was the entertainer in the family, and I wanted to keep everything light and fun and joyful. And while this psychological response would later bear artistic and financial fruits, it also meant that my little 9-year-old brain processed Daddy-O's abusive episodes as somehow being my fault. And it's in this compulsive desire to constantly please others, to keep them laughing and smiling at all times, to redirect all the attention in the room away from the ugly and uncomfortable towards the joyful and the beautiful. It's there that the true entertainer is born.
Wow, let me jump in here, Greg. This is really powerful and a complex paradox. Daddy-O, as we hear, was both Will's tormentor, but also his protector. What's striking is how Will responded to that tension that he felt within the family. He didn't just fight back, he actually performed. Humor was ultimately his survival mechanism, a way to keep the peace and ensure that everyone was safe, not just himself. But what started as a defense mechanism ultimately does become a superpower for him. His ability to entertain wasn't just a talent, it was a necessity. And as we said before, necessity is the mother of invention. And Will had to invent this character to basically stop violence. So it's an interesting, like I said, it's a paradox. There's some really great things that came out of it, but there's also a real darkness in there in terms of his family. And this is where I think, Greg, the power of autobiographies really hit home. When you hear someone's story in their own words, you don't just get the headlines of their success, you get the messy, you get the complicated, and the deeply human reality underneath. It's easy to see Will Smith as a movie star and a rapper and this larger than life character, but through Will, we're actually seeing there's a real emotional blueprint behind it all. It's a reminder that every great performer, there's a story, and we can take lessons. Hence the purpose of this podcast, to learn lessons from history's greatest performers.
Couldn't have said it better, Duncan. The amount of times that I was reading through this book and I'd stop and go, didn't know that. Man, that's really interesting. It really is probably the most times I've done that reading a book in a very, very long time. So let's get back to the story. So I mentioned Gigi a little bit earlier, and one of the things I mentioned earlier as well was his desire to perform for Daddy-O, to try and kind of stay safe in that. But with Gigi, she was really someone that encouraged him to perform and develop a real love of performing. And he says, I begin to perform all the time, whether I was making up skits for my parents or reenacting a movie for my friends or singing songs at church for Gigi. Performance became my little secret oasis of love. It gave me the warmth of affection, but behind the protection of a mask. It was perfect. I could hide myself and be loved at the same time. So just as a reminder here, Duncan, he's still having a rather middle-class upbringing, but it certainly wasn't without challenges outside of the home as well as obviously inside of the home. He said, at Catholic school, no matter how well-spoken or intelligent, I was still the black kid. In Winfield, no matter how up I was on the latest music or fashion, I was never quite black enough. I became one of the first hip-hop artists who was considered safe enough for white audiences. But with black audiences, I was labelled soft, because I wasn't rapping about hardcore gangster shit. This racial dynamic is something that's plagued me in various forms throughout my entire life. This next little passage, there's a word in here that I certainly can't say, so I'm going to leave it blank. You'll know when that time comes. I learned to move between these two worlds. If I was making the kids on the corner laugh, I wasn't getting my ass kicked. If I was making the white kids at school laugh, If I was making Daddy-O laugh, it meant my family was safe. I began to equate laughter with safety. So Duncan, he's having to navigate a couple of different worlds here, and perhaps this is where we're starting to see a little bit more performance as well.
Yeah, we're starting to see Will's ability to shapeshift really take form. performance wasn't just about entertaining, it was about survival in these two different worlds, whether at home, at school, or in his neighborhood. He learned to make people laugh in order to keep himself safe. It diffused tension and earned him acceptance and let him control a room rather than being controlled by it. I think this constant adaptation ultimately comes at a cost. He was never fully at home in any world. He was too polished for hip hop, he was too black for his white school, and he was too playful for his tough neighborhood. Ultimately, what we're seeing here from Will, I think, is just really high EQ, high emotional intelligence to be able to shift between these different worlds.
So to continue the juxtaposition for Daddy-O, he's actually quite a creative person. He's always had a love of photography and of videography as well. Maybe stuff that wasn't particularly encouraged for him within his youth. But Daddy-O ends up getting a video camera and he really liked Will to perform for him. And Will very much liked performing for Daddy-O. And Will says, psychologists have written about how our relationship with our parents in childhood and early adolescence creates our map for understanding love in adulthood. When we interact with our parents as children, some behaviours and attitudes win us attention and affection, and other behaviours and attitudes cause us to feel abandoned, unsafe, and unloved. The behaviours and attitudes that win us affection often come to define what we understand as love. Daddy-O appreciated when I worked hard and performed his directed orders with intensity and precision. He applauded when I was disciplined in laying a perfect brick towards the construction of a perfect wall. Mom used to love it when I used my brain. She applauded the thinker within me when my wit and intellect were most on display. The concepts of love and performance became fused in my mind. Love became something earned by saying and doing the right things. I performed to placate my father and quell his fouler moods. I performed to distract my family from the growing tension and resentment that was consuming our home. I performed to get the kids in my neighbourhood to like me. As such, I began to see happiness for myself and my loved ones as a function of my ability to perform. Wow. Duncan, what lessons can our listeners take from these insights?
I mean, first of all, it sounds like Will has done a lot of therapy or deep, I'd say, introspection work. There's some real insight here. He's learned early on that performance, whether through hard work, discipline, or entertainment, was the key to earning affection in his home. His father, as he said, really valued precision and relentless work ethic, while his mother appreciated intelligence and wit. So naturally, Will became someone who excelled at both. For our listeners, I think it does raise that question. What behaviors did you learn as a child that made you feel loved? Were you praised for being disciplined, for being funny, for achieving in sports or in school? And how much does that still drive you today? Maybe even unconsciously. I think that thread in all of our lives can be traced back to our childhoods. So understanding this can ultimately be a game changer. I think it allows us to recognize whether we're chasing validation or genuinely doing things that actually fulfill us and are authentic to us. I remember back to episode 5 and 6 with Pat Summit, who spent her entire life and coaching career craving her father's love and attention. The first time she heard her dad say, "I love you," was when she was 43 years old and she'd just won her 4th national title. Again, absolutely crazy, but often our deepest motivations are tied back to our childhoods.
And there we have it. I think we have a new performers first. That is the first time that you've rolled a grenade to the audience. Our listeners have to deal with that one. You used to roll them to my feet, but I think that's the first time. And I'll read that question again. What behaviors did you learn as a child that made you feel loved? So nice, easy one for you to chew on there just a little bit. Let's get back to the story here. So after continued physical abuse from Daddy-O, his mother decides to leave him and actually moves in with Gigi, which is about 3 minutes down the street. It's not a particularly far thing, so Will isn't separated necessarily from his mother. Still has that very, very close relationship. Will actually gets introduced to hip-hop by his cousin Paul, and Paul, because of his New York, New Jersey connections, was actually able to get all of the latest tapes and latest things in terms of rap and hip-hop from New York. And Will really very quickly fell in love with him and also fell in love with hip-hop. He says, "With Paul's tapes and encouragement, I became obsessed. I was already an incessant talker and performer, but now I was walking around all day, quietly babbling and rapping to myself, constructing new rhymes, reciting my favourite verses, trying to freestyle on whatever was going on around me. I went out and bought one of those black and white speckled composition notebooks and started writing down my rhymes and practicing them in my room in the mirror. My fantasy-driven mind would splash out all over those pages, sometimes even surprising me by what came out. My creative river was raging, Rapping was the most natural thing in the world to me, and from the cocoon of a bullied, awkward kid emerged a natural-born killer MC. So Duncan, those the notebooks that he was talking about there, he'd leave them strewn about a little bit, and Gigi found them, got a hold of them, opened them up, and wrote him a note when she saw all of the cursing. And it read, "Dear Willard, truly intelligent people do not have to use language like this to express themselves. God has blessed you with the gift of words. Be sure you are using your gifts to uplift others. Please show the world that you're as intelligent as we think you are. Love, Gigi." So from this point on, he decided that his rapping was going to be clean, Duncan.
What a pivotal moment in his life. It really sounds like music has kind of gripped him. It's his outlet now. That writing there, I love that. My creative river was raging. My creative river was raging. That's just a lovely play on words. And the other part, that the most natural thing in the world. So I think he's really found something that he can really attach his passion to. Then there's Gigi's note, right? One small piece of paper ultimately completely reshapes his artistic identity. You know, he became the clean rapper. He wasn't allowed to use swear words, or he chose not to use curse words. And that really ultimately becomes the Will Smith brand, even though it kind of didn't sit well with others in hip hop. He created a genre all from himself, and it was different to other people. So that meant he was more accessible to the mainstream media and mainstream audiences, which, yes, he was criticized by others, but instead of trying to prove that he belonged in the hip hop world, he just said, okay, well, I'm going to do what I do.
To be honest, I hope Gigi never read this book. I'm not sure if she's alive, but there is plenty of swearing in it and plenty of words in there that I don't think she'd appreciate. But to continue with the rapping stuff, it's starting to become commonplace at his high school. Will says nobody knew it yet, but I'd been writing rhymes every day for the past 8 months. I had pages and pages of different concepts and punchlines and stories. There were some guys who were cleverer than me, some had tighter flows, better voices, or a more developed poetic sense, but nobody was as funny as me. Nobody could rock the crowd with a punchline the way that I did. What nobody seemed to ever understand was that you can't beat funny. I was tightening my delivery and trying to deepen my tone. Every break between class before and after school, I was always looking for some sucker who was slipping. I'd battle anybody. The combination of hip-hop and humour made me untouchable. I'd found my voice. I was choosing my words poetically and comedically. And for now, for the first time, I was experiencing a surge of power over my own life. My teachers loved me. I'd be late for a class, or miss my homework, or get caught being silly in the back of the room. They couldn't yell at me because they were laughing. Duncan, like many of our sports performers, Will's highlighting the importance of preparation here.
Greg, you know, one of my all-time favorite maxims is champions work when nobody's watching. And that's exactly what we're seeing here from Will. He wasn't relying on his raw talent. He was actually putting in unseen hours, really refining every aspect of his craft while others were off doing whatever they were doing. This is the classic difference between talent and true mastery: preparation. The best performers in any field, whether it's sports, music, acting, know that success isn't about just showing up. It's about showing up ready and prepared. Like all the elite athletes we've talked about, Will understood that the smallest details, as he mentioned, the tone, the delivery, the body language, the timing, that's what separates the great from the average. And here's the key: time is a form of capital equally distributed to everyone. I'm going to say that again, Greg. Time is a form of capital equally distributed to everyone. The difference is how you use and invest it. While others wasted it, Will spent his time mastering his craft. And for our listeners, the takeaway is simple. Talent might open doors, but preparation is what keeps them open. What you do when no one is watching determines how ready you'll be when the spotlight finally turns your way.
That is incredibly well put. I love that. Talent might open doors, but preparation is what keeps them open. That's incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See, it costs nothing to be nice, even though, time is capital. So he finds so much power in this pursuit, and we see it having an impact on the way that he feels about himself as a person as well. We know he's not particularly confident. He says, in order to feel confident and secure, you need to have something to feel confident and secure about. We all want to feel good about ourselves, but many of us don't recognize how much work that actually takes. Internal power and confidence are born of insight and proficiency. When you understand something or you're good at something, you feel strong, and that makes you feel like you've got something to offer. When you have adequately cultivated your unique skills and gifts, then you're excited about approaching and interacting with the world. And what I learned from Paul was that being good at something allows you to be calm in a storm. knowing that you can handle whatever comes. There's a great Bruce Lee quote that resonates with me. One of Lee's students once asked him, "Master, you constantly speak to us of peace, yet every day you train us to fight. How do you reconcile these conflicting ideas?" And Bruce Lee responded, "It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war." I knew I was good, but I also knew that I had to work. It wasn't just going to come to me. I had to go get it. Duncan, how's your gardening?
Absolutely terrible.
I hope your fighting's good then.
Yeah, I'm not much use in war either, to be honest. Well, Greg, I see such an important mental shift here. Will isn't just finding success, he's actually finding himself through the work. He's realizing that confidence isn't something you're actually born with, it's something that you earn. Mastery breeds that security. The more he's refining his craft, the more control he feels over his life. There is truly a flywheel effect, as we know. This idea translates across performance domains, whether you're in sport, business, entertainment. The best don't rely on just natural ability. They build this unshakable foundation through relentless preparation, as we mentioned. Will understood early on that talent without effort was kind of going to be wasted potential. The more that he worked, the more he knew he could handle those challenges.
So he's growing, his talents are growing, his work ethic's growing. A lot of his attention is going towards rap and hip hop right now. But of course, we can't forget Mom's mantra: education, education, education. So Will sat the SAT and got a low 1200 on it, and his mom is very, very keen on him going to engineering schools. But before we talk about college, and just like Batman needed Robin, a companion enters the fold. When he was 10, Jeff had begun DJing. His encyclopedic knowledge made him a musical marvel. Everyone called him Jazz because of his ability to seamlessly blend complex jazz tunes with modern funk, disco, or hip-hop rhythms. Eventually, that got extended to Jazzy Jeff. So here's a little bit about their connection. There are rare moments as an artist that you cannot quantify or measure, as much as you try. You can rarely reproduce them, and it's nearly impossible to describe them. But every artist knows what I'm talking about. Those moments of divine inspiration where creativity flows out of you so brilliantly and effortlessly that somehow you're better than you've ever been before. That night with Jeff was the first time I ever tasted it. The place that athletes call the zone. It felt like we already existed as a group and we just had to catch up to ourselves. Natural, comfortable, home. Jeff could see my rhyme style. He always knew when my jokes were coming, when to drop out the track so people could clearly hear the punchline, and I could tell by which hand he was using what type of scratch was coming. He preferred different scratches with his left hand than with his right. Sensing this, I could draw the audience's attention to which scratch was coming, by which hand he was transitioning to. He was choosing the tracks and adjusting the tempos based on what he felt best accentuated the narrative structure and the flow of my rhymes. And just as the music crescendoed, I throw down a dagger of a line and Jeff would drop the beat into the funkiest, hottest, party rockin' shit these Philly kids had ever seen in their lives. We never really talked about it, never really made it official, but that wild November night in Judy Stewart's basement, he became my DJ and I became his rapper. From then on, we were DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Just two kids from West Philly, partners, friends, brothers, and we still are today.
More great nicknames, Greg. Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. I was Simmy in high school.
Yeah, you probably didn't win many rap battles with that nickname.
Not many rap
No.
battles.
It is wonderful, and it's nice to kind of hear this origin story, and it all, as it mentioned there, that night in Judy Stewart's basement was a party where Will was meant to turn up with Ready Rock C and do their thing, and they were going to battle Jeff and his MC, whose name I completely forgot, but man, this isn't a memory test. That MC and Ready Rock C never actually showed up, so they just got together and kind of did their thing. So a little bit of kismet, a little bit of sliding doors here. Duncan, we hear about these types of partnerships in sports all the time. What hip hop's out of this section for you? That could be the worst joke I've ever said on this podcast. Not the worst joke I've ever said, but definitely the worst joke I've ever said in this podcast.
Oh, okay. I'll take that bad joke.
Yeah, I was just seeing if you were paying attention.
I think it's a classic case of two people who just elevate each other beyond what they could ever achieve alone. There's a connection there. They didn't have a plan. They didn't overthink it. It just clicked. And I think in sports, the best duos, they complement each other and they enhance each other. Simple as that.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And the other thing that is just pure good luck as well. And that helps to solidify that connection is it turns out that Jeff just has this really insatiable work ethic too. Will says, Jeff's 3 years older than me, so he'd already graduated, but I still had to go to school and work at the ice house, which was Daddy-O's business. By the time I get to go to rehearsal about 4 o'clock, Jeff had already put in 10 hours of work. He'd give me 2 tracks to write to. I'd show up the next day with 1 written, and he'd hand me 6 more tracks. This went on for the first few months of our partnership. DJ Jazzy Jeff was a hip-hop terminator. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep, and he was absolutely, positively would not stop until you were dead. I tried to keep up. I'd stay as late as I could until Mom or Daddy-O would call asking me if I knew what time it was. Those early months in Jeff's basement were among the most creative times I've ever experienced. Everything was cutting edge. Everything was hot. It was experimental and inspiring. I never wanted to leave. We were seeking our sound, but we found ourselves.
Greg, I think this is where we see iron sharpens iron. Will had this intense work ethic already from Daddy-O, and now he has met someone else who would match or actually even push him further. Jeff wasn't just talented, as he said, he was absolutely relentless. And I think that kind of obsession forces everyone around you to level up, or they're just going to fall behind. Will thought, again, that he worked hard, but Jeff's relentless dedication completely, I think, rewired his understanding of what true commitment looked like. It made me think there are moments in life when you meet someone who shatters your reference frame for what's possible. Someone who isn't just good, but they're operating on just an entirely different frequency. It's like realizing what a 12 out of 10 truly looks like, whether that's a work ethic or just a level of intelligence or humor or talent. Seeing it up close kind of fundamentally shifts your mindset. It forces you to actually rethink and redefine your own limits. For our listeners, this is a reminder, I think, that greatness isn't just about motivation. It's about proximity. If you want to be exceptional, surround yourself with people who challenge you, who stretch your vision of what's actually possible.
That's phenomenal. If you don't, dear listener, if you don't take anything else out of this podcast episode, take that. If you want to be exceptional, surround yourself with people who challenge you, who stretch your vision of what's possible. So nicely put. So obviously when you combine that talent, that charisma, that work ethic, when you put that all together, success is only a matter of time, really. Will says our rise in the Philly hip-hop scene was nuclear. We'd done every show we could. Block parties, school dances, proms, basement parties, birthdays, fundraisers in church parking lots, you name it, we did it. Our big break came in September 1986 when Jeff was invited to compete in the New Music Seminar Battle for World Supremacy. The Battle for World Supremacy was an old-school DJ and MC battle competition held annually in New York City. All of the legends of hip-hop had performed and competed in it. Grandmaster Flash, Busy Bee, Mantronix, Melly Mel, and so on. It was like the Olympics of early 80s hip-hop. Jeff was flawless that night. And when it was all said and done, the 1986 World Supreme DJ was a kid who spent most of his life in a basement in southwest Philly. My DJ, DJ Jazzy Jeff. Wow, Dunk, I don't think you got an invite to the 1986 World Supremacy Battle.
I was only 6.
Hey, still, if you're good enough, you're old enough. So not only has Will found someone who absolutely matches his work ethic, but he's also just fortunate to have teamed up with the world's supreme DJ. Will says we weren't quite sure where this was all going, but we had a sense that some important fuse had just been lit. We stayed up all night laughing, dreaming, plotting, planning. That night was the first night I realised the possibilities hip-hop presented me far outstretched anything I dared hope for. My whole life, my parents' hopes for me had been predicated on education and hard work. I was supposed to go to college. I was supposed to get a good job. I was supposed to move up in the world. And as the self-designated golden child, I'd always committed to living up to my parents' hopes and dreams. I couldn't imagine it otherwise. But by the time we drove home the next morning, New York disappearing behind us, I was struck with an overwhelming conviction. I'm not going to college.
Greg, this is a massive turning point for Will, and it's highlighted in the book, not just in his career, but I think in his identity. Up to this moment, as he said, he was the golden child. His entire life had been shaped around earning other people's approval. So for him to suddenly declare, I'm not going to college, that wasn't just a career decision. I see it as an act of self-definition. It was the first time he was stepping out from under his parents' expectations and actually choosing his own path. One that ultimately had no guarantees. There was no clear structure. There was no safety net. And that's what makes this moment so powerful. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was actually the realization that his future was bigger than the one that had actually been mapped out for him. That night in New York, the fuse that it lit, not just for his career, but for his ability, I think, to truly bet on himself.
You're right. Mom doesn't particularly take it well. I'll remind you again of a mantra: education, education, education. But things in the hip hop world start to go pretty well for them. They start to put some records out. The crowds are getting bigger and bigger, kind of riding that wave of Jeff's success in that competition. And they start to kind of go down the classic route of being on the road and touring on a tour bus with dodgy venues, skimming managers, the whole 9 yards. And Will says about this period, life is learning, period. Overcoming ignorance is the whole point of the journey. You're not supposed to know at the beginning. The whole point of venturing into uncertainty is to bring light into the darkness of our ignorance. I heard a great saying once: life is like school, with one key difference. In school you get the lesson, and then you get the test. But in life, you get the test, and it's your job to take the lesson. We're all waiting until we have deep knowledge, wisdom, and a sense of certainty before we venture forth. But we've got it backwards. Venturing forth is how we gain knowledge. Duncan, I've used the maxim, life gives the test first and the lesson second. Is this what we're seeing here?
Yeah, and I absolutely love that saying. I think the key takeaway is you're not supposed to have it all figured out before you start. He's a young person here. The knowledge, the wisdom, the expertise, they don't come before you actually take action. They come because you take action. So many people hesitate, waiting for certainty before they make the move. But Will's experience shows that diving into the unknown is the only way to truly learn.
Now, the book itself, there's lots of names and lots of relationships, and there's a lot of sort of industry speak in there, and there's managers and contracts and promoters and this, that, and the other. We're choosing deliberately not to include all of that stuff in here because it doesn't really fit our purpose on performers. Again, go back, read the book. Wonderful stuff, wonderful story, wonderful kind of journey. So we're going to jump ahead to an opportunity that Will and Jeff had to record in London, and here's him discussing a little bit about those recording sessions. He says those recording sessions were probably the purest creative experiences I've ever had in my career. We recorded so many songs, and the record company loved so many of them that they decided to attempt something that had never been before tried in the world of rap. DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince would release hip-hop's first double album. Jeff and I had no concept of what this album was going to do, whether it was something fans would want to hear, whether MTV would like it, whether radio stations would play it, whether hip-hop heads would diss it. None of this crossed our minds. All we cared about was that we were inspired and inflamed by the creative process. We were having fun. We were best friends at the center of our new family, and we were on the cutting edge of a burgeoning global art form. And then we jump forward to the Grammys 1988. The unimaginable happened. It was announced that the 31st annual Grammy Awards would be the first to include a rap category. And parents just don't understand, won the Grammy for Best Rap Performance. They had arrived. He says our shows were getting bigger and bigger. The crowds were getting louder. Thousands of people saying my words back to me. I felt loved, protected, and cradled by a crowd of strangers. We were red hot and unstoppable. At 20 years old, I was a world-famous rapper, a Grammy Award winner, and a freshly minted millionaire. Pun intended. So, somehow that isn't enough. After his girlfriend Melanie cheats on him, he goes off the rails a bit. He starts fighting. He starts hanging out with some interesting characters. Again, some of that's wonderful in the book. It's a really interesting read. And he says, the thing about money, sex, and success is that when you don't have them, you can justify your misery. Shared. If I had money, sex, and success, I'd feel great. However misguided that might be, it psychologically permeates as hope. But once you're rich, famous, and successful, and you're still insecure and unhappy, the terrifying thought begins to lurk. Maybe the problem's me. Of course, I dismissed that foolishness quickly. I just needed more money, more women, more Grammys.
Greg, we've seen this over and over with our performers. Fame and money brings unimaginable temptations that are hard to resist. I mean, I've never had either, but I'm willing to give it a try.
Yes, in the name of science, experimentation there would be fine. So they're flying high and the stock is on the up and up, and they decide to go to Nassau in the Bahamas to record another album and basically just burn through money, drinking, having sex and having a good time until JL, who was his manager, decides to fly Daddy-O out to break up the party. The album gets completed, but his dad is pissed. And of course, what goes up must come down, and his fame stock is starting to drop as the album unsurprisingly crashes. So they're burning through money. It's like $100,000 a day, something like that for this studio, and it's just an absolute shit show, Duncan. He says, Gigi's words were ringing in my mind. Just remember, lover boy, be nice to everyone you pass on your way up, because you might just have to pass them again on your way down. Becoming famous is about as much fun as the material world has to offer. Being famous, bit of a mixed bag. Being fading famous, sucks ass. So this becomes even more apparent, this fading of his fame when he spends time in LA. He says, LA illuminated the limits to my fame. I was huge in the world of hip-hop, but in Hollywood, I was nobody. At a Lakers game, I was nobody. At the Roxbury, I was extra nobody. When Eddie walked in, he shut it down. It was humbling, it was embarrassing, and it was frustrating.
Greg, I think this is the harsh but inevitable reality of success. No matter how big you get, there's always another level. And that's the lesson here. If your identity is tied solely to status, you'll always be chasing validation in bigger rooms. The goalpost will always move. There'll always be someone with more fame or more money or more power. The key isn't to outrun that reality. It's to actually define success on your own terms. And Will has to do this.
So during his period of success, which everything was going really, really well, he forgot a somewhat small detail, minuscule perhaps even might call this, Duncan, and that was to pay the tax man. So he ended up owing tax on $3 million.
Oh, is that all?
That's all. Yeah. I'm sure that's. You find that in the ashtray, I assume. He says, I was rich and famous minus the rich and minus the famous. I was worse than broke. I was in the hole. The walls were tumbling down. So he decides to move out to LA because he kind of just likes it out there, and he probably because he needs somewhat of a fresh start. And in LA, what he starts to do is essentially just hang out around the Arsenio Hall set with his sort of bodyguard, his minder, Charlie Mack. And he's just trying to establish some relationships and meet some new people, try and get some wheels in motion. Hey, Will, this is Benny Medina, an A&R exec at Warner Brothers Records. Benny, this is the Fresh Prince. You know that, though, Charlie Mack said. Benny knew all about my music. We talked for a bit about hip-hop and the impact technology was having on the music industry and the future of video on demand. And then, out of nowhere, he asked, do you know how to act? You mean to play the role of who everyone around me wants me to be, rather than who I actually am? As a general rule, if someone asks me if I can do something, the answer is always yes. Yes, I figured you could, Benny said. I can see it in your music videos. I might have something to talk to you about. Let's keep in touch.
Greg, this is a great rule, right? Say yes and figure it out afterwards. Just imagine if it actually said no.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those sliding doors moments that we talk about a lot. And the reason it's a sliding door moment is that moment in the meeting that Will had will prove to be a defining moment after he receives a phone call. Quincy Jones wants me to come to his birthday party, I said to myself as much as the squad. To perform, Omar asked. Nah, him and this dude Benny Medina have an idea for a TV show they want to pitch me. So this is where he receives the pitch for the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but Quincy actually wants him to audition in the middle of the party. So he kind of moves all of the couches out the way. Now, just as a context, Steven Spielberg, Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie. This is Quincy Jones's birthday party. This is heavy hitter, wall to wall. And you've got to stand in the middle of this and give an audition. Reality took hold. Quincy Jones was asking me to do an impromptu audition in front of some of the biggest icons, present and past, in all of entertainment, not to mention the top brass at the National Broadcasting Company, home to The Cosby Show, Cheers, Golden Girls, LA Law, and Seinfeld. My knees buckled. Couches were being moved and someone handed me a script. I grabbed Quincy's arm, probably a little harder than was respectful. Quincy, no, wait, no. I can't do this now, I whispered in his ear. Quincy looked at me with an unflinching, tipsy joy. You all keep setting up, he ordered the room. I'm going to talk to Will in the library. Quincy leaned in, eyes crystal clear, suddenly sharp, totally sober. But right now, everybody that needs to say yes to this show is sitting out there in this living room waiting for you, and you are about to make a decision that will affect the rest of your life. I took it in. What you going to do, Philly? Fuck it, I said. Give me 10 minutes.
Greg, this is the definition of a sliding doors moment. I think it's one of those rare, high-pressure decisions where Everything that follows hinges on a single choice that he has to make here. Will has seconds to decide whether to play it safe and walk away, or is he going to step up and take his shot that could literally change his life? This is the moment, I think, that defines all high performers. When preparation meets opportunity, we've said that before here, and you have to decide whether you're going to take that leap. Will's whole life, unbeknownst to him, has led up to this moment. His hustle, his work ethic, his ability to command a room has led him to this choice. It's such a visceral moment in the book. For our listeners, this is a reminder that life-changing opportunities don't always come neatly packaged. Sometimes you don't get time to prepare. The question is, when the moment comes, are you ready to say yes?
Such a great point. I love that line. Fuck it, give me 10 minutes. I love that. Yeah, it's just so powerful, that sliding doors moment. So obviously we are fully aware of what happens next. They agree to make a pilot and he falls in love with this process. Will says, I loved it. I found my thing. The world of acting unleashed all the artistic impulses within me. It was the first external canvas that felt big enough to hold the landscapes of my imagination. My musical expression always felt narrow and constrained by the limits of my skills and talents. Making music felt like living in a great neighborhood, whereas acting felt like being set free in an infinite universe. As an actor, I would get to be anybody, go anywhere and do anything. World champion boxer, fighter pilot, tennis coach, galaxy defender, cop, lawyer, businessman, doctor, lover, preacher, genie. I would even get to be a fish. Acting encompasses all of the things that I am: storyteller, performer, comedian, musician, teacher. Don't get me wrong, I really like making music, but I love acting.
Greg, when was he a fish?
I think he was in a Fish Story or Fish Tale or something like that it was called. Was it not a Pixar or a Disney thing?
Yeah, maybe. Anyway.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, you're the one with kids. You should know the answer to this more than I do. Anyway, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air premiered on September the 10th, 1990, and it was an immediate success, and it became the highest rated debut show of that season. That meant they were definitely going to be doing more seasons. Will says, I was hungry, focused, and excited about the new life I was being blessed to undertake. But my personal and professional crash and burn had taught me a harsh, universal lesson. Nothing lasts forever. Everything rises and falls. No matter how hot the summer gets, the winter is inevitable. I promised myself I would never get caught sleeping again. That during the good times I'd plant and nurture the seeds of the next thing. And if I was truly wise and attuned to the movements of the industry, I would be able to time the harvest of the next thing impeccably, just before the death of the old thing. In the same way that my music career was scorching hot, then icy cold, I knew the same thing would one day happen in TV. I was about to be on a blaze, but one day I knew I'd be cold again. I asked myself, after television, what would be my next thing? There was only one answer: movies. So Duncan, it's clear that he's learned a very valuable lesson from his last downfall.
Every career, every industry, every trend, like he says, rises and falls. The key isn't just enjoying the success, it's actually using the success to build to that next opportunity before the current one fades. And in that moment, it sounds like he's really treating his career like chess. He's always thinking a few moves ahead, which is, again, that intellect and the things that Mom has passed on to him, that through line back to his childhood is just apparent here.
So in 1993, he's cast in the movie 6 Degrees of Separation, and it's a great ensemble cast, some really high-level actors in there. And he really commits to the process and decides to try method acting. Duncan, I don't really know too much about method acting myself, but I think it's just you really immerse yourself in the character and you live and you breathe, kind of a Daniel Day-Lewis approach, I think. And the character's name is Paul, but playing Paul and using the method acting technique really impacted his ability to play Will in The Fresh Prince. He says, I couldn't remember how he walked or talked or which Jordans he preferred. This went on for 10 full episodes at the beginning of season 4. I'd lost my sense of humour, my timing, my swag, my charisma, and my ability to improvise and ad-lib. Cast and crew alike were terrified. This was a season that Alfonso Ribeiro, truly began to shine. For the first few episodes, the writers had to write away from my character and towards Carlton. Alfonso stepped up and took the comedic weight. No one knew what was happening. No one was relating my behaviour on the set of The Fresh Prince to my ill-conceived foray into the dangerous psychological world of method acting in 6 Degrees. I couldn't tell a joke to save my life. The scary part was that I couldn't see what everybody else saw. But if enough people tell you that you're drunk, then you should probably sit down. So I immediately hired 5 or 6 of my friends from Philly to work on the writing staff, on the crew, and to surround me on set while I relearned how to play the character of Will. Duncan, this is a really interesting one because obviously Will was very much Will Smith's persona in real life. And the fact that he's had this experience of being Paul and going into the method, as it were, is kind of making him almost forget who he is, not just the character Will, but who he is at the core.
It's incredibly interesting. And, I'm probably way out of my depth here because I don't know anything about method acting, but I think it's a classic case of diving in too deep without a real foundation to navigate method acting. Will wasn't formally trained in acting. His entire career up to this point had been built on instinct and charisma and that natural comedic timing. So when he's tried method acting, he didn't have the experience or actual education to switch back and forth between the roles. Instead, it sounds like he lost himself in the process. I think the key takeaway here, it isn't just about acting, it's about understanding your own process. This is a reminder that pushing yourself into a new challenge is crucial for growth, but without the right education and preparation and background, it can ultimately backfire.
Yeah, I think this definitely serves as a cautionary tale here. And I love the way that he kind of got back to himself, was to just bring people from his hometown around him, friends and families, to kind of recollaborate. So obviously 6 Degrees of Separation was kind of his first foray into movie acting. But from here, he goes from strength to strength. Just to rattle off some movie titles here for you, Duncan. Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black, Enemy of the State, Wild Wild West, Ali, Men in Black 2, Bad Boys 2, I, Robot, Shark Tale, that's the one that we couldn't remember, Hitch, The Pursuit of Happiness, I Am Legend, and Hancock, resulting in more than $8 billion in global box office. 2 Academy Award nominations for Ali and The Pursuit of Happiness, over 30 million records sold, Men in Black, Getting Jiggy With It, Just the Two of Us, Miami, and Wild Wild West. Not to mention that the theme song from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which technically, according to him, not me, counts as a record, in which case it's the biggest rap song in history, he says, but that's neither here nor there.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So here's one for you, Dunk. If you're able to get some advice as a movie star, imagine that you were able to tap into these 3 people. So this is at the launch of Planet Hollywood in Australia. Quick question. I want to know what you're all doing. I want to be the biggest movie star in the world. And if there was ever an iconic trio who knew, it's y'all. Sly Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Bruce Willis. That takes some audacity to ask that question. So Arnie, maybe the elder statesman, takes the mantle. He says, "You're not a movie star if your movies are only successful in America. You're not a movie star until every person in every country on earth knows who you are. You have to travel the globe, shake every hand, kiss every baby. Think of yourself as a politician running for biggest movie star in the world." Bruce and Sly concurred. So he says, Arnold had given me the key that would become my secret weapon for the next 2 decades. Made perfect sense to me. Movie companies were putting up north of 150 million to plaster movie posters in every country in the world. I would get to piggyback on their massive financial investment. In my mind, I was never promoting a movie. I was using their money to promote me. As far as I was concerned, the movie's not the product here. I am the product. And I was grateful to the movie companies for their investment in my future.
Greg, hearing this section, and one maxim that really stood out for me was, to get something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. And the fact he's asking the question of those 3, he's asking, how do I become the biggest movie star in the world? I think that just demonstrates his mentality and his unwillingness to settle to just be an actor. He wants to be the biggest movie star in the world.
I think it demonstrates the bollocks on the man as well, to go and ask arguably the 3 biggest movie stars, how do I get better than you? So the man is shooting nothing but net. Movies are going great, music's going great, TV's going great. He says, I never understood the term embarrassment of riches until Getting Jiggy With It went to number 1. It was my first number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and so much shit was going so absolutely perfect in my amazing life. I was legitimately embarrassed. I always remembered the image of Michael Jordan shrugging, palms up, after dropping his 6th 3 in the first half of Game 1 in the 1992 finals against the Portland Trail Blazers. He couldn't miss. He wasn't necessarily even a 3-point shooter, and even though he was choosing to shoot the shots, he'd practiced the shots, and he was taking the shots with every intention of making them. He was just as shocked as we were when they were all going in. Just for a sense of timeline, Independence Day was July 1996. The Men in Black song was mid-June 1997. The movie was 2 weeks later. Big Willie style was November 1997, right after I started filming Enemy of the State. I married Jada on December 31st, 1997. Getting Jiggy With It was released in January 1998 to a decent response. Then it laboured a bit through February. That month I received my third Grammy for Men in Black. So we're sort of okay with Jiggy not being a hit.
When I listen back to that, I think it kind of shocked me. You realize what a huge star he was, but that run is just ridiculous, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a difference between, I think, star and absolute cultural icon here. Like that time frame, you wouldn't have been able to avoid Will Smith. I don't think there's anyone around that wouldn't have a clue who the person is.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, not a bad run of success at all. So, as he is obviously progressing very, very well through the movie world, the type of movies we talked a little bit about his range started to change. So he was approached to do Ali, the biopic of Muhammad Ali, of course, and he didn't really want to do it in the slightest and turned it down and really, really, really was against the idea. But then he's asked to visit Muhammad Ali personally. Ali says, I don't want anybody else to do this movie. I've been telling people no for years, but I would be honoured if you would tell my story to the world. Duncan, how do you say to that? How do you say no to that? That's insane.
Well, he offered me, and I did say no.
Interesting. You couldn't make weight.
No, I couldn't.
So preparing for this movie, he enters training with Daryl, and they're not actually training for a movie. They are training for a legit prize fight. If you go back and read the book, Daryl is an intense man and he has some intense ideas. But basically, he's training as a boxer here, not a man who is playing a boxer in the movies. Maybe not exactly method, but pretty damn close. So obviously, a famous part of the Muhammad Ali story in the movie itself is the Rumble in the Jungle. And Will Smith goes to Africa to shoot that scene, and he gets to spend some time with Nelson Mandela as well. And they actually maintained a relationship afterwards, but Will didn't get to see him again because, of course, Mandela passed away. And he reflects on that moment. He says, Madiba was gone. This was one of the greatest moments of regret in my entire life. How could I not have taken him up on his offer? Over the years, I've done deep soul searching around that question. He held me in the purest affection and highest regards. It was scary to me. He saw something in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself. I think subconsciously I didn't want to spend extended time with him for fear that I wouldn't live up to his impression of me. Maybe I thought he'd ask me to do something or change something about my life that I'd be unable or unwilling to change. Madiba thought I was special. I didn't want to prove him wrong. Duncan Nelson Mandela would reach out to him over and over again to try and spend some time with him, and even said to him, hey, listen, I'm an aging man. I don't want to miss this opportunity, and Will decided not to take him up on this offer.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty sad part, to be honest. It's also a clear example of imposter syndrome. I think even at the highest levels, we've just talked about what a global superstar he is, and he has the highest levels of success. I don't think he was afraid of Mandela, but he was afraid of not measuring up to how Mandela saw him. And that's the imposter syndrome that we've talked about before. I think it's a reminder that sometimes we avoid opportunities, not because we don't want them, but because we have fear of what they might demand of us. Growth often requires us stepping into a version of ourselves that we're not fully ready to embrace. And I saw this on Instagram the other day and it really resonated. And I think it fits in. It was that confidence and fear both involve believing in something that hasn't happened yet. Why would you choose fear? I'll say that again. Confidence and fear both involve believing in something that hasn't happened yet. Why would you choose fear?
Duncan, that's such a great transition there, and it actually feeds beautifully into this next section around fear. Will says there's a strange and perturbing success paradox. When you have nothing, you suffer the fear and pain of grinding to achieve your goals. But when you have everything, you suffer the brutal recurring nightmare of losing it all. I had the wife, I had the family, I had the property with the name, I was the biggest movie star in the world, but I started to notice the subtle sickness, a sort of sneaky poverty mentality. I was more anxious and more fearful than ever. It all seemed so fragile, one injury, one scandal, or one flop movie away from having to move back to Philly. What if the financial crash of 1929 happened again? There's only one fear worse than the fear of not attaining the object of your desire, and that is the fear of losing it. Duncan, success perhaps requires leaning in even more into the mental game?
Yeah, great question, Greg. I think this really speaks to the unchanging nature of human experience. No matter how much success you accumulate, the money, the status, the influence, you're still subject to the same fears, the same insecurities, the same mental battles as everyone else. Will reached the pinnacle of his career, but instead of actually feeling invincible, he felt actually more fragile than ever. This is the hidden truth about success. It doesn't free you from fear. It just shifts what you're afraid of. When you have nothing, you fear never making it. When you have everything, you fear losing it, as he says. No level of achievement exempts you from self-doubt and anxiety. And we've heard that over and over again in our performer's journey. And for our listeners, I think the lesson is clear that external success won't fix internal struggles. If anything, it can actually amplify them. True security doesn't come from status. It comes from how you train your mind to handle the fear and the uncertainty, and self-worth at every stage of the journey. In other words, success isn't just about a skill or an opportunity. It's about psychological endurance for me. If you don't work on yourself, no amount of success will ever feel like enough.
And I think part of the inner work that you're talking about here isn't just about managing emotions. It's also about how do we attribute success and failure, and what do we attribute success and failure to? So in psychology, something called attribution theory explains how people interpret events and assign certain causes to certain outcomes. So some people attribute success to talent or to luck. Those would be classically external factors, things outside of their control. While other people might see it as the result of effort and discipline, which we see as largely internal factors that are in our control. The latter mindset is often linked to what we call a growth mentality or even a growth mindset. And that's the thing that drives relentless improvement and resilience. So, how does Will frame his success? So, Will, to what do you attribute your meteoric success? Well, I consider myself to be fairly average in talent. Where I believe I excel is in my unflinching, unyielding discipline and work ethic. While every other guy is eating, I'm working. While the guy's sleeping, I'm working. While the other guy's making love, well, I'm making love too, but I'm working really hard at it. Reporters used to love that response. And while I was joking, the reality of the math was very simple to me. If I could wake up and start an hour earlier than everyone else and stay an hour later than everyone else and work through my lunch break, I would be gaining 15 extra hours every week on the competition. That works out to 780 more productive hours in a year than the next guy. That's the equivalent of 1 month. If you give me a 1 month head start on anybody, they'll never catch me. And if they need their weekends and vacations so they can get their beauty rest and recover and maintain their little punk-ass work-life balances, then they'll always be looking at my taillights.
Greg, I see a fascinating contradiction here. I think Will attributes his success almost entirely to his work ethic, not talent, not luck, just relentless effort. By his own logic, that means that success is replicable. If everything fell apart, he should be able to build it back up brick by brick, just as he always has. But that's not actually how he sees it. Despite believing his work ethic is the key, he still fears losing everything. It's almost as if deep down he does believe that there's something fragile about his success, something that once gone might not be recoverable. That fear of loss seems to contradict the confidence that he has in his own process. So the important lesson here is if your success is based on something internal, your mindset, your discipline, your ability to outwork others, then setbacks shouldn't be these big existential threats. True confidence isn't just believing you can win. It's knowing that if you lose, you can actually rebuild. Will's story challenges us to ask, do we really trust our own process? Or are we secretly afraid that our success is more circumstantial than we'd like to admit?
Man, that's a really tough one to ponder, that one. I really like that question. Quite existential. So, jumping ahead, The Pursuit of Happiness came out in 2006 and his second Academy Award nomination. So the streak continues. I Am Legend, then Hancock, and he became the highest grossing film actor ever. And he still wasn't even 40 years old. But he said, the problem was, I'd conflated being successful with being loved and happy. These are three separate things, and since I'd conflated them, I'd end up suffering from an even more insidious version of the subtle sickness, which I can best describe as more, 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 more. If I'm more successful, I'll be happier and people will love me more. But there was this public perception that things were perfect for him, Duncan, and he was married to Jada Pinkett Smith at this point, had Trey from his previous marriage, and had Jaden and Willow, who were forging their own careers in acting and music. They were even asked to go onto Oprah's show to kind of showcase the family's perfection. He says, I was the biggest movie star in the world. Karate Kid, Jaden's first feature film with him as the star, was about to be the #1 movie in the world. The first season of Jada's new show Hawthorne had premiered with her as the lead role. Willow had just signed up to Rock Nation to record her first album. Trey was the star of his high school football team. And to top it all off, here was my ex-wife talking about how much her and Jada collaborated to raise the kids. I finally had it. My own version of Dallas. The picture was complete and it was perfect. So Duncan, this part of the book, he talks a lot about feelings and not really sort of understanding the importance of feelings. So feelings kind of start to, not necessarily in a bad way, but pervade his life a little bit. And he starts to experience problems in his marriage, and those problems manifest in not a great way, and they eventually end up separating. But following this, he decides to take some solace in a trip to Trinidad and Tobago on retreat. But he actually found it really, really difficult to switch off. And he said, these jokers are really about to sit around and do nothing all day. I was dying. There was no service on my phone, so no texts or calls. We were an hour from land and 90 minutes from an airport. I was trapped. I felt like a caged animal. I was getting angry. How dare they waste my valuable time like this? I was jittery. I was pacing, checking the time on my phone. And then I caught myself. I noticed the turbulence of my thoughts and feelings, which stood in a stark contradiction to my surroundings. And I thought, oh shit, this is crackhead behavior. I could not sit still. My mind was agitated. I needed an activity, a target, a mission, an adventure, something, anything to do. It all slowly drifted into focus. Am I an addict? I don't do drugs. I don't really drink. I'm not hooked on sex like some ghetto hyena. But I don't know how to stop or be still or be quiet or alone. I'm addicted to the approval of others. And to secure their approval, I became addicted to winning. And to guarantee and sustain my stream of massive victories, I became addicted to working, to grinding, and obsessively pursuing perfection. But there was a deeper issue at play. I saw downtime as the enemy, a place where you lose things. When I had left space between Melanie and me, she cheated. Daddy-o saw the space between tasks at the shop as laziness. Daryl never wanted me to sit down in the gym. He saw downtime as the crack where the pleasure principle would poison all our hard work. I didn't want to leave space between my TV show, the next movie, and my next record, because I didn't want to give people an opportunity to fall in love with The Rock during my absence. But the most perturbing aspect of my need to fill every second was that it kept me away from having to feel. Duncan, there's a lot there I appreciate, but what are your reflections?
There is a lot there, and it's really raw and honest. He was addicted to movement, to winning, to never stopping, and that's the irony. His entire life had been about control, about outworking everyone to stay on top. But here he was, completely incapable of controlling himself in stillness and just being quiet. He had been conditioned to believe that stopping, even for a moment, meant losing ground, whether that was in relationships, business, or in his career. There's that somewhat stoic saying, just because you're doing more doesn't mean you're getting more done. And I think he was just in that place where he was just constantly doing. The lesson here is that success without stillness is a treadmill, not a journey. If your identity is built entirely on constant motion, what happens when you're actually forced to stop? Do you know who you are without the grind?
It's really nicely put. This realization for him was an incredibly powerful one, and it actually led him to seek some assistance. And after working pretty intensively with a therapist, and the therapist actually challenged him to swim because he'd never really swam before. So he went out and learned how to dive, and in true Will Smith fashion ended up doing scuba dive and Great Barrier Reef, the whole 9 yards here. But one of the things that he sort of realized through this process was to kind of surrender himself to the ocean. And he reflects on this by saying, surrender has always been a negative word for me. It meant losing or failing or giving up. But my burgeoning relationship with the ocean was exposing that my sense of control was actually an illusion. Surrender transformed from a weakness word to an infinite power concept. I had a bias towards action, thrusting, pushing, striving, struggling, doing, and I began to realize that their opposites were equally as powerful. Inaction, receptiveness, acceptance, non-resistance, being. Stopping was equally as powerful as going. Resting was equally as powerful as training. Silence was equally as powerful as talking. Letting go was equally as powerful as grasping. Surrender to me no longer meant defeat. It was now an equally powerful tool of manifestation. Losing could be equal to winning in terms of my growth and development. Duncan, the remainder of the book actually gets somewhat philosophical, and you can certainly tell, as you mentioned earlier, that he's been in therapy and done some really deep work. And he discusses actually his rather frequent use of ayahuasca that opens up some very interesting psychological doors for him. But that stuff isn't really a focus for us here on Performers. So let's bring this to a conclusion with a conclusion. So Will's dad, Daddio, is given 6 weeks to live and actually lasts 3 months. So while on FaceTime, after his dad calls Will to tell him it's time, his sister sets up Daddio on FaceTime, and this is what he says. His sister says, "Dad, you're just looking. You don't have anything you want to say to Will?" Daddio searches for one last piece of wisdom, one final brick, but he's empty. He slowly shakes his head, a final surrender. "Shit, anything I ain't told this motherfucker already, he sure ain't gonna get it from me tonight." We share a final laugh. We said goodbye, and 45 minutes later, Daddio was gone. One of the central and most critical tenets of filmmaking is know your ending. When you understand the emotional, philosophical, and moral conclusion of your movie, you can better craft everything that leads up to it. The comprehension of the physical plot and thematic endpoints allows you to reverse engineer a more resonant and enjoyable journey for the audience. The end of a film is similar to the punchline of a joke. You want the meaning to erupt in the hearts and minds of the audience. Imagine beginning to tell a joke without knowing the punchline. Life is like that. You're born into a bunch of characters. Everyone's looking at you. You can't communicate. You can't walk. You can't feed yourself. Yet everybody seems to be excited to see what you're going to end up doing. So you begin telling your joke with no fucking clue what the punchline's going to be. You're watching the audience. Sometimes they chuckle. Sometimes they boo. But deep down inside, they hope you land the punchline. And that's where we'll leave it. Duncan, what are your top 10 life lessons from Will by Will Smith?
My top 10 life lessons from Will by Will Smith. Here we go. Number 1, lay one brick at a time. Focus on small daily efforts instead of overwhelming goals. Daddio said, "Stop thinking about the damn wall. There is no wall. There's only bricks. Your job is to lay this brick perfectly." Number 2, success is a mental game. External success won't fix internal struggles. It often amplifies them. There's only one fear worse than the fear of not attaining the object of your desire, and that's the fear of losing it. Number 3, confidence is earned, not given. Confidence comes from preparation, discipline, and doing the work. He says, in order to feel confident and secure, you need to have something to feel confident and secure about. Number 4, say yes and figure it out later. Don't wait to feel ready. Opportunity rarely waits. He says, as a general rule, if someone asks me if I can do something, the answer is always yes. Number 5, be around people who push you. The right environment will challenge you to grow beyond your limits. He says, when you're surrounded by someone that's driven, you either rise to the challenge or you get left behind. Number 6, success is cyclical. Always prepare for the next move. Nothing lasts forever. Plant seeds for your next opportunity before you need them. Everything rises and falls. No matter how hot the summer gets, the winter is inevitable. Number 7, imagination is a superpower. Believing in a reality before it exists is what makes it possible. When you are unaware that you shouldn't be able to do something, then you just do it. Number 8, mastery requires obsession. Talent isn't enough. True greatness comes from relentless effort. And I said, champions work when nobody's watching. Number 9, define success on your own terms. Chasing validation from others leads to an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. If your identity is tied solely to status, you'll always be chasing validation in bigger rooms. And number 10, fear and doubt exist at every level. Even the most successful people battle self-doubt. The key is to push through it. Madiba thought I was special. I didn't want to prove him wrong.
All right, that's a phenomenal list, but what are your top 10 behaviors to avoid from Will by Will Smith?
Well, it's a great book, but there are a number of things to avoid. So, top 10 behaviors to avoid from Will by Will Smith. Number 1, letting fear of failure paralyze you. Avoid holding back because you're afraid you're not good enough. If someone you admire sees something great in you, lean into it. Number 2, over-identifying with your achievements. Avoid defining yourself solely by your status or success. And he says, I had conflated being successful with being loved and being happy. Number 3, thinking you have to be ready before you start. Avoid waiting for perfect conditions before you take action. He says, we're all waiting until we have a deep knowledge, wisdom, and a sense of certainty before we venture forth, but we've got it backward. Venturing forth is how we gain the knowledge. Number 4, chasing more instead of appreciating enough. Avoid assuming happiness comes from accumulating more success. If I am more successful, I'll be happier and people will love me more. Number 5, forgetting that success is temporary. Avoid getting complacent when things aren't going well. I promised myself I would never get caught sleeping again. Number 6, ignoring the mental toll of high achievement. Avoid thinking success will remove insecurities rather than magnify them. And he says, no matter how much success you accumulate, money, status, or influence, you're still subject to the same fears, insecurities, and mental battles as everyone else. Number 7, neglecting the power of your environment. Avoid surrounding yourself with people who don't challenge or inspire you. If you want to be exceptional, surround yourself with people who challenge you. Number 8, letting external validation dictate your path. Avoid making choices based on what will earn you approval rather than what you truly want. And he says, I perform to get the kids in my neighborhood to like me. Number 9, failing to adapt when the game changes. Avoid sticking to what worked in the past instead of evolving. And he says, I had lost my sense of humor, my timing, my swag, and my charisma. And finally, number 10, living in a constant state of hustle. Avoid believing that stillness is a weakness rather than a necessary part of life. I did not know how to stop, or be still, or be quiet, or be alone. Thank you so much for joining myself and Greg on this episode. If you're still here and if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone you know, and that will help us grow the show and keep us doing what we're doing. See you next time on Performers.